Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this day. We pray that you'll watch over us today and bless our time together. And we thank you for the gift of your word and the gift of salvation, and our understanding that someone accepted the Lord online during the first service. We just pray, Lord, that you would be with that person and help them as they begin to grow in the Lord. Bless us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to talk about widening wars. And I have a lot of, so we talk about this stuff about acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. Things are going to be happening quickly. We see a lot of that in our world today. And I think that as we get closer, we're going to be in this time of Daniel chapter 12, where people are going to understand more and more how these things are going to work out. And so, I get these questions all the time, like, well, where's the rapture? And what about the 70 weeks and all this stuff? And look, I have my opinions about how these things are going to work out, but the best evidence of how these things are going to work out is when they actually work out. And what I object to online a lot of times is people putting words in my mouth that I've said something that I haven't said. So if you're going to comment on our comments, I would appreciate that you actually go out there and investigate it a little bit further before you make an assumption, and understand that when I do a video, I don't say in that video everything that I've thought about in 25, 30, 40 years of teaching on this topic. It's that you can only do so much each week. And so I can't talk about every single topic each week. And so I would just encourage people to be a little bit judicious in their comments. And I appreciate your comments and everything, but it's just that sometimes we have a tendency to get a little bit out of sequence, I think, sometimes. So this week we're going to talk a lot about wars and rumors of wars and some other things that are going on. And I'm not even going to begin to scratch the surface on a lot of these things. Literally, this one is most updates that I do could be quite long. Now, this week, by the way, I did do a couple of interviews. I think I was on Worldview Matters, on David Fiorazzo. I think he calls it Worldview Matters. It's a new podcast. I was also on J.B. Hickson, Not by Works. You can find those online or in podcast or on YouTube. I don't know where all they are. I don't think J.B. Hickson's on YouTube anymore. But so I did that. And I also interviewed Jonathan Feldstein from Genesis 1, 2, 3 and Israel. And we talked a lot about the war, the things that are going on in Israel. He has a son in Gaza right now. And as he relayed there, the constant need to attend funerals of people in the community. Israel's lost, I think, about 185 or so soldiers now in Gaza. That doesn't include the several hundred that were killed on the October 7th attack. So they're running about 500 soldiers dead. There's also been soldiers killed up north. And this is problematic. And I'll talk a little bit about how the United States seems to be interfering in how Israel's conducting the war. I don't think it's a good thing. That's my personal opinion. I'll show you some stuff from the genocide trial that's taking place at the International Court of Justice in The Hague in the Netherlands this week against Israel, claiming that it's genocide. I'll talk about that when I get there. And then I'll talk just a little bit about the start tomorrow of the World Economic Forum meeting. So in the next 5 weeks, there's going to be a couple really big, important globalist meetings that I think will have significance prophetically as we go forward. That would be the Davos World Economic Forum, starts tomorrow and runs through Friday or Saturday this week in Switzerland. And then in February, I think it's February 12th to the 14th in Dubai, will be the World Government Summit, which is kind of an interesting title when we talk about globalists and that type of thing. You say, oh, the globalists are meeting for the World Government Summit, and immediately they will say, well, we're not globalists, Well, then, why do you call your big conference the World Government Summit, if that's what it's about. And you're going to see, excuse me, you're going to hear a lot about artificial intelligence and development of technology. There is also, I don't have anything much to say about it today, is the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas that's going on, where they roll out all of their tech ideas, some practical, some neat, and some just crazy. But one, I think it was Joe Allen, who's written a book on transhumanism, went and he said this is the toy show for the people of Davos, the World Economic Forum. I thought that was an interesting description. So in terms of wars and rumors of wars, this thing, Ecuador, I had some friends in Ecuador. So what happened in Ecuador was that they had some drug cartel leaders in prison. There's tremendous, and I have friends that live in Ecuador, well, I should say, well, I know people in Ecuador. And the word that and you can just get this from the article, this is from the New York Times this morning, there's tremendous corruption in Ecuador. One of the things that Ecuador has done is Ecuador has become an important link in China's Belt and Road Initiative. China has come in there and built some big dams. And Ecuador is unique. They have pretty much 24/7 power because of the mountains and the rivers that they have. They have these giant hydroelectric dams that give pretty much, as I said, 24/7 power. Unless somebody's cutting the copper wire to the transformers and stealing the wire, then the electricity doesn't work. But they have a lot of power. But one of the most recent dams that was built, and I think it might be the 9th one that's been built for hydroelectric power, China did it, and the design is pretty substandard. They've had tremendous silt buildup in the river, and it's just not working. But China says, listen, we built this. You signed the contract. You essentially mortgage natural assets. So we're going to take those assets to cover us. And one of the things that Ecuador does have is oil, and China's always looking for oil. When I think of China, sometimes the Chinese Communist Party government, not the Chinese people necessarily, but the government in charge, I kind of think of them. Remember the movie Independence Day, where you had these big spaceships going from planet to planet, kind of like locusts eating up all of the natural assets of each planet. It's kind of how I view the way the Chinese Communist Party operates a good bit. In Russia, they're still having these, the war is still going. It's not going very well for Ukraine. And it's a war, it's turned into a war of attrition. Russia's lost a lot of men. Ukraine's lost lots of men. And Ukraine, I just don't know how Ukraine recovers as a society going forward. I know there are big plans for Ukraine, but they've really lost a lot of people in the current generation. Millions of people have fled the country. I just don't know how it comes back. And when you're in a war of attrition with a country that's 4 times your size, it's pretty hard to keep up unless you just have tremendous weapons stores, which Ukraine does not. And Ukraine, a lot of people have provided that to Ukraine, and now a lot of countries, including the United States, have depleted large portions of their weapons store so that if there's another conflict, there's a big problem. So that's another war and rumor of war thing. And I'll talk some other time about how this all fits in. This is a big political week. The Republicans have their first caucus in Iowa tomorrow. The weather's really lousy. The weather's going to be lousy. The weather's bad enough in Buffalo that they canceled a football game in Buffalo or postponed it for a day, which is pretty unusual. But it's kind of hard to get to the stadium in Buffalo right now. They've had a lot of snow. It's sub-zero wind chill, and it's snowing, and you can't clean the field off of snow, and you really can't. Kind of hard to play football when the white lines don't show up in the white snow. and you can't keep them cleaned off for over the game. So that's a big problem. The NFL, though, by the way, I don't know, I posted this on Facebook. They did sort of a blessing to everybody last night. They only allowed the Kansas City Chiefs playoff game to be streamed on a service that not that many people have, so we didn't have to get updates about the one Kansas City Chief and his girlfriend and her attending the game and everything. So that was kind of a blessing in disguise. We didn't have to read that all night. But the other thing is, this is another article, I think this from the Washington Post and New York Times this morning, about the fact that the issue of abortion is going to be a big deal. Everybody was excited when Roe versus Wade got overturned, but that was only the very, very beginning of the fight. And now you're fighting 50 years of education of trying to overturn people, assuming, well, I have a right to abortion whenever I want to have a right to abortion. And so it's going to be a process to get those things overturned. It's not going to happen. Absent massive repentance and revival in the United States, I always give that caveat. I just don't see it happening anytime soon. It could be a very big election. Even here, the county in which we live voted for the, I would call it, unrestricted abortion amendment that was on the ballot in the spring, and it was approved here by a vote of about 65, I think it was 65% in Delaware County approved it. And that's a pretty heavily, at least used to be, a pretty heavily Republican county. There's a thing I'm going to flag for you that I also want you to watch, because these globalists, these elites, are always trying to take control of everything. Now, one good news this morning is that John Kerry is leaving his post as the climate czar in the United States because he's going to work full-time for the Biden campaign. And I guess, Kerry can do that because he's only 81, and Biden, he's sort of I think he was the oldest person they could find that's still walking around that's older than Biden. So maybe he'll make Biden look younger in photographs of them together. I'm not sure what the purpose of it was. But this is something that I've been starting to read about, haven't been able to do a lot, but what they're doing is they're creating natural asset companies. What they're doing is they're creating a new class of assets. So the assets, so you might own a farm or a ranch. Let's say you own a giant ranch. That ranch has water on it. It has minerals underneath it. It might have oil on it. It has air above it. It has trees, all of those things. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to monetize and create an asset class for everything that is associated with the land. And what some companies doing, like particularly the Rockefeller Foundation, is they're creating this intrinsic exchange group. So what you're doing is they're going to be able to transfer those assets. And in some cases, these trusts, like the Rockefeller Foundation and other climate trusts, are going around and getting people to sign away the natural asset rights to their property. And when they do that, that's permanent. You can't get it back. And it's creating sort of some very complicated property transfer issues in the future. And their goal is to take 30% of all natural assets out of control of anybody, private hands, by 2030. And they're saying it. So this is what the Rockefeller Foundation says. This new asset class in the New York Stock Exchange will create a virtuous cycle of investment in nature that will help finance sustainable development for communities, companies, and countries. Together, IEG and the New York Stock Exchange, Intrinsic Exchange Group is IEG, will enable investors to access nature's store of wealth and transform our industrial economy into one that is more equitable. So there you see equity, diverse, equitable, social, governance. All these things are connected, and they're still pushing it, and they're becoming very creative. Now, there's a lot going on in the digital space. I mentioned that they're trying to regulate artificial intelligence, and there's not much happening there. This is a interesting. Neuralink has now come out. They have a Neuralink startup working on tech so that you can keep working while you dream. In other words, they want you to be able to produce for humanity 24/7. I think it ignores the fact that sleep is actually kind of supposed to be beneficial and recharging your brain. And I don't think you need to understand that the people that are doing this, they don't care about whether it's good for you or not. And my concern is, and I saw a video this week by a guy named Nels, Nehls, on the High Wire with Del Bigtree. You might want to watch that about brain chemistry and how brain functions and everything, and the implications of this in the time that we live when we talk about the mark of the beast technology and control, and then even implants and chips like Neuralink wants to do. That's something that's very concerning. Davos will be meeting this week. They've already said that some of the things they're going to talk about, they're going to talk about artificial intelligence. That's going to be a big deal. I think the overarching theme of the conference is called Rebuilding Trust. Now, I wonder why they have to rebuild trust. Was there anything that's happened in the recent past that's caused people to lose trust? And the answer is yeah, and they recognize that, so they're going to try to fix that particular problem. Now, this week, they had a news conference and they released their global risk report, which they do every year just before the Davos conference. Now, I'm not going to play you. You can go online, go to the World Economic Forum YouTube channel, click on the live tab, and the live tab will take you to the hour-long program that they had, should you want to watch this for the introduction of this report. And this was sort of the big finding in their report this year. As polarization grows and technological risks remain unchecked, truth will come under pressure. Now, around here at FBC, we've been talking for years about the war on truth. Now the question becomes, what is truth? Remember, this was the question that was asked during Jesus' trial. What is truth? And I think I started studying the postmodern effect at least 25 years ago, talking about it at conferences, about the war on truth, and that truth was becoming very relative. And now we see this happening all the time. So you turn on any channel, news talk, whatever, and people are pushing narratives at you all the time. Some of these narratives are completely untrue. They're just totally false. But then when you raise it, well, I saw this happen at this particular event, like the event at the Capitol. We all know what I'm talking about. And you will say, well, I have some questions about that. They will say, no, you didn't see what you saw. I know you saw that on a video, and I know you heard audio, but that's not what you saw. They're gaslighting us. And so there's going to be a lot of gaslighting at the Davos World Economic Forum this week, as they have these maps that they make up about how everything is integrated. So here they have, like, the bigger the circle, the more important it is in their map. So this is one of their maps that they use. So here on the sort of center right, you can see social polarization. That's the big deal. Disinformation. They're very, very concerned about disinformation. That's connected to intrastate violence. And then up here, you have involuntary migration, as if they don't mention voluntary migration, which seems to be a big problem in the United States. Down here, big things that are connected: economic downturn, asset bubble burst, even though they're creating these new asset classes, debt, unemployment, illicit economic activity. So you can see how they've kind of connected all these things. But in the upper right-hand corner, They have misinformation and disinformation. Adverse outcomes of new developing frontier technologies, technological power, concentration. So they're talking about these things, cybersecurity, because, look, when everything's digital and everything's interconnected, cybersecurity is a big issue. And there are going to be bad people in the world that are going to try to take advantage of that. So I'll be monitoring the World Economic Forum meeting today, this week, and we'll talk about it when as I have time. I might do some interviews again this week. I do have a couple scheduled already now that I think of it. So one of the things that's a big deal in the world today is China. China seems to have its fingers in everything. I'm not sure that I sort of subscribe to the notion that China has some major issues, and because it's the most populous country on the planet, at least right now, its problems are magnified. So they have this shadow bank that they've had has collapsed. They've had real estate problems. They've built these cities with nobody in them. So far, it's a big problem. One of the things that was related to the disinformation, misinformation thing at the World Economic Forum is the effect of this on elections. About 50%, close to 50% of the world this year will have national elections. I think that might be unprecedented. 50% of the world's population, 50% of the world's GDP will be undergoing elections. So there's a potentiality for a lot of disruption. So here's a French paper talking about disinformation, Financial Times on the right, the rising AI threat to democracy, about deep fakes. I think you're going to see ads and videos in this election, and you're going to need to question whether they're real. I think they're going to be so good that it's going to be very difficult to figure out whether they're real or not. This is from the Washington Post the other day. 2024 brings worldwide wave of elections with global democracy on the ballot. The most recent example of the potential of disinformation, and of course here there's the narrative about what happened in Washington a few years ago, and this week or last week was the anniversary of that, third anniversary of that, and everybody was talking about it. And again, people were pushing their particular narrative about what happened that day. I think some bad things happened that day, but I think some things were overblown, and the government still continues to arrest people. You can send me an email. I'll send you, rather than talk about it and get our YouTube channel taken down, there's some good documentaries that have been made about those particular events and the people that have gotten caught up in the investigations that I think are worth looking at. Very well done, very concerning if you're concerned about things like constitutional rights and fair trials and that sort of thing. And they continue to go after former President Trump. They're going to go after him. I mean, that's a given. And I have friends that cannot stand Trump. I have my own concerns about Trump. You could still be my friend and disagree with me on what's going on with him. My concern so much is not the person as much as what they're doing, because they're not going to stop with him. That's the concern that I have. And I think everybody should look at that and be concerned about that. I don't think he's getting special privilege by any stretch of the imagination. I had a friend suggest that to me this week. And I just disagree with him. He's still my friend, but we're just not going to be able to to agree on that. Now, one of the most recent examples of disinformation in elections was the election in Taiwan. And this is kind of a big deal because the Chinese Communist Party had its favored, they favored a certain party to win. They had the elections yesterday, and this is very shocking. They had it was either Friday or Saturday. They had the elections at the close of and they only voted on one day. They didn't have mail-in ballots. They didn't have absentee voting. You went and voted that day in Taiwan. It was on a paper ballot. They took those paper ballots. So it was either, certainly the results came out yesterday. So they closed the polls and they counted the votes, and now they have the results. It didn't take 3 or 4 weeks to get the results in where everything was done by machines, like here in the United States, which is kind of an interesting thing. People went, they showed their ID, they got to vote. Seems like that's a pretty simple way to operate an election. But there were, as they headed up to the election, there was a lot of propaganda. And this guy in this article, he says, look, I could put up videos with conspiracy theories and I'd get a lot of views and everything, but I'd rather take a reasonable approach and try to be truthful in what I put up. And as a result, he doesn't get the views that he used because he's not sensational. Well, what happened in the election was that Taiwan elected the candidate that was not favored by the Chinese Communist Party. In the past, the candidate has said that he would like to see an independent Taiwan. He sort of backed off of that. But people, of course, today it's kind of hard to find, or it's kind of hard to hide whatever you've said in the past. I have a friend. I'm not sure how to say this. I sort of noticed from some posts on social media that things might not be going the right way with that friend. And I asked Pam if she knew anything, and she said no. And I can tell you that it took me 10 minutes to find out what had happened, what had been going on, where she was living and what she was doing, and pretty much the exact problem that she had. Even though I had no knowledge of it, there was nothing posted by her about that. I didn't even try that hard to find out. I did it because I was concerned about her. It's not for the purpose of gossip. But, and so this guy has said in the past what he was doing. This guy who was elected has said that he's opposed to authoritarianism. China has made statements that they're going to invade Taiwan. They're going to take over Taiwan. And so that's the big concern is when is this going to happen? I think eventually they'll move, but I think they're having some economic problems right now. I don't know that their military forces are that strong. And I know as soon as I say that, I'll get emails from people saying, oh, you don't understand how strong they are, the strongest military on the planet. And I'm sorry, I can show you other people who've analyzed it and think to the contrary. And with most of these things, time will tell. I do think that China will eventually, when they think they're strong enough, move to take over Taiwan in a more dramatic fashion. They're already doing, for the last year, they've had like a drone swarm surrounding Taiwan in the air, of these big drones flying around all the time. They do the balloon thing, just like they did the balloon over America. And by the way, I've been reading up on some of that. They think that China got unbelievable amounts of information from that balloon as it went over the United States. And when was that? Last year? 2022 or 2023? Just 2023. It's funny, that sort of shows another point is things happen so quickly. And so many things happen that when you start to talk about that, when did that happen? Like 4 years ago? Oh, no, that was like 3 months ago. It's hard to keep track of what the time is. So, but China has a demographic problem. Eventually it will, and I think it's already starting to drive how they view things going in the future. Over in Asia, there are more wars and rumors of wars. You know that there were like 600 mortars and missiles fire exchange between South Korea and North Korea over the past 10 days. And it doesn't really even make the news. We have Ecuador, we have China, we have, there's just disruption in a lot of different places. So wars and rumors of wars, that's what Jesus said we could expect. Now, this is one more thing that it'll be discussed at World Economic Forum. So if anybody wants to, the fact checkers want to fact check me, I got this from the World Economic Forum schedule for the Davos meeting. And if you could zoom up to the top there, and it says, there we go, preparing for disease X. Now, wait a minute, and I'm telling you, I'm seeing all kinds of stuff being written about this. With fresh warnings from the World Health Organization that an unknown disease X could result in 20 times more fatalities than the coronavirus pandemic, what novel efforts are needed to prepare healthcare systems for the multiple challenges ahead? This session is linked to the Partnership for Health System Sustainability and Resilience and the Collaborative Surveillance Initiative of the World Economic Forum. And understand, Collaborative Surveillance Initiative is capitalized. So that means it's a formalized program. What are they planning? And there's a lot of things going on in the WHO proposals for what they want to do to take control. They're proposing a treaty. They're calling it a treaty. But my concern is that our administration, the current administration, I think it's supposed to be finalized in May, around May 24th or something like that. And this has been discussed. I think Michelle Bachmann's done a lot of things on it. Other various conservative outlets have talked about what's going on with the WHO. And of course, when everybody says, we have concerns about it, that's misinformation, that's disinformation. Well, this is in their own documents, what they want to do. And the concern here is that under our Constitution, that if there's a treaty entered into by the executive branch, it has to be approved by Congress. I think it's a 2/3 vote. I think it's a 2/3 vote of the Senate. I'm not sure if the House gets to vote on that, but you remember, and we have recent examples of the second Obama administration, this being the third one that we're in the midst of right now, it appears to me and a lot of other people. I think even Fox News the other day was using the term the Biden administration. I should have I said that. Now, look, maybe somebody else said it first. I'm not taking credit for saying it first. And when I said it, it was as I've been prone to do in my life, public speaking, this happens, slip of the tongue. I was sort of thinking of a couple concepts, and one came out in the word Biden. And I should have copyrighted it, trademarked it, but I wasn't that clever or that fast. Because I think that's what's going on. And so in the second Obama administration, I guess it would have been an Biden administration at that time too, they did the JCPOA with Iran. And with the JCPOA with Iran, that gave a lot of relief to Iran. And remember, there was billions of dollars of cash that got transferred to Iran under that. It really was in the format of a treaty, but Obama said, no. It's just and I believe his Secretary of State was a guy named John Kerry at the time. This is just and the Assistant Secretary of State was a guy named Anthony Blinken. This is just an agreement. It's not a treaty. And it was a way to just avoid this little thing called the Constitution, because it would have never got passed it would have got voted down 2-1 rather than approved 2-1, which would have been required. So pay attention to this, because I think this is going to be a big deal as we go forward. And this will be, I think this is on January 17th at 11:30 to 12:15. That's Central European time. So I think they're 6 hours ahead of us. So this will be at 5:30 Wednesday morning if you want to get up that early and watch what our elite bettors have planned for us on this particular topic and how they're going to implement this with the Collaborative Surveillance Initiative, CSI. Just something about that doesn't sound like it's something that I really want implemented, or that we should really want implemented. I'm just going to bring this up as kind of a Boeing's having a lot of problems. We flew on a 737 MAX 8 jet when we came back from California in August or July. And I love that plane. It's because they don't have first class, which I rarely fly in anyway. It's got the most legroom of any plane on the plane because the seats are thinner. And so, of course, you have more legroom. And I'm a tall guy, so that is an important thing. But here on this Alaska Airlines, they had an exit door. It was covered over. They put like a plug in it because of the way Alaska Airlines configures, they didn't need that extra exit. And what happened in mid-flight was the plug blew out at 16,000 feet. The plane was going about 440 miles per hour. And one of the interesting stories is somebody's cell phone got sucked out the window and fell 16,000 feet. And they found it, and it was still working. And so my question was, I wonder how many ads for like parachutes or airline safety and everything came into the phone on the way down. That would be kind of an interesting study, I think. That's how my mind works. So but as we get more globalized and everything, this is going to be an increasing issue. So fortunately, nobody got injured here. Now, most of the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about Israel, Gaza, the North, Lebanon, the International Court of Justice, and these sort of things as we finish up. And I have a couple long clips that I'm going to play, so I'm going to try to get to those so you don't have to listen to me drone on. You can listen to somebody else drone on. And one of them's a lawyer. Okay, so that's good. We like lawyers around here. This is a big problem. I do not see personally how Israel resolves this without a war in the north. And I would say not only a war in the north, but potentially a war in the West Bank. So they're winding down some in Gaza. They've said that the northern third of Gaza is pretty much under control. They're now into 100 days. This is the second longest war in the history of Israel. The 1948-49 War of Independence being longer. So this has been a long war. This thing in Gaza it's causing a lot of problems in Israel. How did this happen? Why didn't they do anything about this? Why didn't they prevent this from happening? Didn't they know what was happening? And some of these tunnels, they're being built, the tunnels they found, they're big enough to drive cars through. How did they get away with that? And I'll have a few articles. There's a few articles linked in the show notes, the description of this video that you may want to read from the Begin Sadat Center. They're pretty good. If I have time, I'll reference them. But this is an underground city. This is the most complex terror base on planet Earth. But understand that in that little white area there along the ocean, there are hundreds of miles of tunnels they continue to find them. They go to a particular place and they'll find 8, 9, 10 tunnel entrances. And people are popping up out of these tunnels and shooting them because they've hid weapons all over the place. It's very complex and they're very organized. But understand that on the Lebanon border in the north, that's up there in that mountainous region, it's in the black area to the north of those mountains, it's believed that Hezbollah has a far more complex base. And whereas Gaza might have had 15 or 20,000 rockets to fire, and they continue to fire them, even though there's Israeli soldiers all over the place in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah has 10 times or more, 15 times as many rockets as Hamas had. And some of the ones in Lebanon and Syria are much more sophisticated. They're precision guidance. And the fear is that they'll launch a massive barrage. Israel will shoot down the missiles with their Iron Dome. They'll deplete Iron Dome, and then Hamas will bring out the good stuff, the precision guided things that can reach all the way across Israel from Lebanon. It's a major problem. There's also concern that as Israel is withdrawing troops from the north and sending them home, some are being sent home with orders to report back in a month or so because it's believed that there's going to be a war in the north and they'll need them. But it's interesting that, and a lot of these soldiers are reserves. These 3 months ago, these guys had jobs. They were accountants, technicians, shop owners, whatever people do for a living in Israel. Might be a lawyer, might be a school teacher. And now they're in the reserves and they're fighting a war, and they've gone through a lot. They've gone through a lot of training, but sadly, close to 200 since the Gaza operation started in earnest have been killed. And there's a similar, not that many up north, much less number. And I was listening to Caroline Glick. I'll play a clip of her in just a minute with David Wormser. Going to funerals every day for people in your community, sons of neighbors that have been killed in action. And in a country like Israel, so I did an interview this week with a guy named Stan Goodenough. His name actually is Goodenough. He grew up as a son of missionary parents in South Africa, moved to Israel many years ago, a tour guide, and he loves Israel. And it was a very, I love Stan. Stan is a very intelligent thinker, understands the issue of Israel and the Bible and how it fits in God's plan. And it was just happenstance I met him. I was with Bill Koenig and Brian Schrager. Bill said, hey, I'm meeting some guys down at this hotel. So we were staying, Pam and I were staying in Jerusalem. Pam said, I'm tired, you guys go. And I go there and there's Stan. So that was almost 7 years ago, and Stan's still a friend. And so if you want to listen to that, go to our YouTube channel and just look up Stan Goodenough. But Stan, it just was a very interesting perspective. And what it shows, though, when you make a friend in Israel, it's like you become friends with everybody else that they know almost immediately. So we've been there a number of times. I meet people every time we go, and they become your friends. And then everybody who's a friend of theirs becomes a friend of yours. Because it's a small country. There's only 9 million people, about as many people as there are in New York City area. And so you become connected to almost within a couple degrees of separation of everybody in the country you're connected to very quickly. So when these funerals happen, it's very troubling. So the Houthis in the south of the Arabian Peninsula, there's been a long war with Saudi Arabia over the last 10 years. I'm guessing that somewhere around 300,000 or 400,000 people in Yemen. The Houthis are controlling part of Yemen at the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula. And and it's one of these countries where, well, we don't really think that much about all the people that live in Yemen, but in Yemen, there are about 4 times as many people as live in Israel. So if Israel's 9.5 million, it's 35 to 38 million in Yemen, and they've had a war. It's a very poor country in many respects, but they're an Iranian, the Houthis are an Iranian proxy. They're Shia. They oppose the Saudi government. They oppose the Yemen government. And so there's been a civil war there for a long time. And right now it's kind of in a state of truce, but they don't like Israel. So they started attacking ships in the strait there along the Red Sea leading up to Israel. And they're saying no Israel ships can go through here, and it's affecting world shipping. So here's the Times of London yesterday. Houthis on the warpath. And what happened was that the United States went in and attacked their bases. About 72 areas were struck by U.S. missiles in the south of the Arabian Peninsula. Here's a little bit closer map. You can see the Houthis control that area where the strikes took place. The strikes were done by the United States and the UK. And now everybody's upset. Joe Biden's leading us into another war. But the war has a practical effect. It's affecting Mideast shipping. There's a lot of oil that comes through there. There are a lot of the world's goods, somewhere between 15 to 20, maybe 25%, depending on the materials that you're looking at, come through that particular strait in the south. So there's been this attack. This is an opinion piece in today's Times of London that action was vital, but there will be Red Sea repercussions. And now everybody's upset that they've done this attack and the war's going to widen. And I understand that. But what do you do when world shipping is being affected? In the United States, whether you like it or not, one of the reasons why the United States has its status as the world reserve currency, which is under attack by the BRICS. I don't know how quickly that'll happen. I think eventually it will be no longer the world's reserve currency. The BRICS added a number of countries on January 1st, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, to the original group of South Africa, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, China, and India. But one of the things they don't have yet is they don't have like their own currency to serve as the world's reserve currency to conduct world trade in. That takes time to put together. It could come about, look, everything is accelerated now. It could come about very quickly, but they're not there yet. But they're trying. And the U.S., though, has provided essentially security for the world's oceans to allow free trade. And because of that, the United States has gone to world reserve currency status. It used to be Great Britain. Great Britain used to do that, but then it fell on hard times. And after World War II, there was a transition to the United States. And it's good for the United States economy. I think you don't want to live in a country that's not the world reserve currency. That's my thinking, because it makes my life better. So I'm very self-centered, I guess, when it comes to that particular thing. But this is affecting world trade. The head of a big shipping company, Maersk, has said, listen, this is causing a lot of disruption. It's causing very long transit times. Tesla came out and announced this week that they're shutting down a plant in Germany that makes electric cars because they can't get the components in time. So they're going to shut down for 2 weeks, which is about the length of time that a ship that would have gone through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean to get to Germany, now has to go all the way around the Horn of Africa, and it adds roughly 2 weeks transit time, but it has an economic cost to it. So people who work at Tesla in Germany are going to be out of work for a couple of weeks. By the way, I saw it, as you know, in the United States. In Canada, it's very cold. I think it was, 5 below when I came to church this morning. And it's much worse out in Canada. I saw places where Calgary, Edmonton were 45 below zero without the wind chill yesterday. I saw a Twitter post by a guy who lives in Saskatoon, and he was traveling to Saskatoon, and he stopped at a place where there was a Tesla charging station. As we drove across Canada, you would see these charging stations that never had anybody there, but there was a guy there. The businesses by the charging station were closed because of the weather. And so the guy asked him, said, well, how's this Tesla working for you in this sub-zero weather? And he says, well, not so great because it's taking much longer to charge. So he was sitting there, and because it was 40 below zero, he had to have the heater on in the car, which was draining the battery as he charged it. So it's taking him 2 or 3 times longer to charge it to a partial charge than it normally would because he had the heater on, and he had been there for a few hours charging it to about 70% capacity, I think the Twitter post said, and he had spent $100 charging his car. And he says it cuts the range down. He goes, and I don't really like the car in the winter because of that, because the range goes down, because the batteries aren't as efficient in the cold. He said, no, I don't really like it that much in the summer because when it's really, really hot, the air conditioning has to run and drain the battery pretty fast too. Hertz came out with an announcement this week that they had put a lot of electric vehicles into their fleet. Like when I went to Scotland, there were a lot of options to rent an electric car. But I'm sort of looking like, here's where I want to go. This is how far it is. This is the range. And some of these only have a range of a couple hundred miles. So I'm thinking like, I don't know how much time I want to spend charging my car when I want to be sightseeing or playing golf. I did be able to work some golf in Scotland. And Hertz came out and said they're selling off most of their electric vehicles that they have in their fleet. So if you're looking for a deal on an electric vehicle that doesn't have much range, you might check out Hertz because they're going to be selling them. But this is a big problem. So this is this attack going, the light area there at the south, that's the area controlled by the Houthis. That was attacked by the United States and UK. The dark area is this, the Yemen government controls. And then the yellowish area, the light, very light area, that's Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula organization. So the concern is this going to cause a bigger Mideast war? The Houthis are really fired up. They had this massive demonstration in their capital, Sana'a, yesterday, maybe 1 million people there. Pretty impressive. This is Khomeini. The crimes of the Zionist entity will not be forgotten even after the disappearance of this entity from the face of the earth. These crimes and the murder of thousands of children and women will be recorded in the books. So Iran keeps stoking it. This is an Iranian-backed organization. Here's another photograph of the protest that took place. Pretty impressive. Here is a BBC interview, and I can't remember who this is with, talking about what really drives the Houthis. What do they believe? What drives them? And the Houthis have a chant, a governing phrase, and this guy will talk about it.
If you want to know what the Houthi terror pirate regime is about, you need only look at its slogan, which very helpfully was right by your right ear until a second ago. It says, Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to Israel, cursed be the Jews, victory to Islam. The Houthi terror pirates have all the self-awareness of cartoon villains, but they are no laughing matter. They're a dangerous business.
They are a dangerous business, but you don't want to see this escalate across the wider region?
No, of course not. We very much hope that this conflict can be contained and that the massacre that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th, that chapter can end with the destruction of the Hamas regime and return of the hostages. But I think that the escalation tonight reminds us of the importance of the UK-Israel alliance, because we find ourselves both fighting different proxies of the same Iranian regime. In Gaza, we're fighting against the Hamas rapist regime, which perpetrated the brutal massacre of 1,200 people on October 7 and took 250 people hostage. And now we find the UK and the US fighting the Houthi pirate regime, which is also aligned in a proxy of Iran. And that reminds us that in the grand scheme of things, in the big fight for international peace and security, the UK and Israel are on the same side.
That's Elon Levy. Sorry about that. Well, this is Saret Zahavi. She heads up the Alma Research Center in the north of Israel. And they're concerned there's, 60, 80, 100,000 people have evacuated the north. Some have said they may go back home, but most of them will say, I'm not going back until it's safe. And you have to deal with Hezbollah. You have to make it safe for us. And some people are saying, we're never going back anyway. It's tremendous internal displacement in Israel because of this, because of the threat from this. And she said this, something that somebody doesn't even really talk about. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, confirmed that Iran had increased the production of uranium enriched up to 60% to about 9 kilograms per month at these two facilities combined since the end of November. The Western media reports claiming that Iran is not interested in war are at best misleading and at worst indicate a lack of understanding of the chess game we are experiencing here. Iran initiated the war, but as long as it can use Arab blood and not conduct this war in its own territory, it will continue along this modus operandi. Under these conditions, French and American ministers and advisors travel throughout the region, seeking to create diplomatic solutions to problems that would only grow worse under the very proposals that they make. She's exactly right. And Anthony Blinken and Amos Hochstein have been running around over there trying to figure out how to do this. And then this report today in the New York Times, the firepower of the Houthis remains largely intact despite the wave of strikes. So we're really good in the U.S. that when somebody attacks us enough, we go and blow up empty buildings. And this is from the New York Times this morning. The big question is whether this can be contained. Biden tells Iran, we're ready to go. This is a report from Alma. Also this week, Alma Research talks on pushing back Hezbollah from the Lebanon-Israel border are designed to deceptively pacify Israel. And so here's Amos Hochstein. This is a report. He's going up there, and he's talking about this place in the north of Israel called Sheba Farms. It's not a farm. It's a mountain. It's a heights. It's a very strategic land. And he's talking, I did the maritime border. That worked out wonderful for Israel. They got peace, right? There was going to be peace, and there's a peace. Well, how long's that lasted, Amos? And so we have these, frankly, lunatics. This is the new ambassador to Lebanon that's coming in. And the title of this article is, My Mission Does Not Include the Sheba Farms. And you'll see a little bit about this. So he's saying, look, we're going to get this solved. I'm going to get this solved. We're going to bring peace to the north. And I just think that as I analyze it, war seems to be inevitable. This is from the Washington Post the other day. Israel's talks of expanding war to Lebanon alarms the U.S. And there was a report, supposedly, that the Washington Post saw, confidential, top secret report from the Defense Intelligence Agency saying, from the United States assessment that, boy, if Israel goes to war with Hezbollah, they're not going to be able to handle it. They're not going to be able to handle Gaza and Hezbollah at the same time. Now, I have a lot of confidence in Israel, but it's going to be kind of a difficult thing. So we have here in the north, you see Beirut and Haifa. Here are some other maps. Let me see, I get my laser pointer here. So this area in here, so this is Majel Shams. If you've been to the north of Israel, that's the farthest north town. Mount Hermon is here. And this area here is Mount Dov, Sheba Farms. It's not a farm, it's a mountain range, and it's the heights, and you want to control the high ground. And so here, this is, there's a village called Gajar, there's Tel Dan, that's about 2 miles there. So Amos is going over there, well, we have all these border disputes, and we'll just give more land to Hezbollah, and they'll agree not to use it for bad things against Israel, and everything will be okay. Well, how's that going to work out with a company, an organization that is dedicated to your destruction? So here's another view of the same thing. So here's Beirut, and then the coast, of course. There's Tripoli up there, you know, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And then over here is Damascus, right here on the right. So from Damascus across to here to Beirut, to give you some idea, that's like 50 miles. So it's not that far. Here's Mount Hermon. Here's Majel Shams. If you've been to Caesarea Philippi, that's right in there. And then Tel Dan is right over in this region. And so from Majel Shams to Tel Dan, as the crow flies, is about 6.5 miles. So you can tell everything is very, very close there. So and so the question is, well, we'll just have them withdraw north of the Litani River. And so Israel, let's see, here's Metula. That's the furthest north town. So the border comes across here, this direction, and then it kind of goes to the north up around Metula, and then it goes over to Majel Shams, and then this would be the Golan Heights over here on the right. And so, but they talk about, well, we'll withdraw north of the Litani River. Well, the Litani River kind of comes down. You see this sort of green area here on the map? That's the Litani River, and it goes over to the ocean here between Tyre and Sidon. You might recognize those names from the Bible. You might recognize them from Psalm 83, and I think that that's kind of an important thing. So the goal is we're going to get them to move north of the Litani River, and then everything will be okay. Here's a discussion between Caroline Glick and David Wormser from the Center for Security Policy here in the United States, talking about this particular situation and the U.S. influence. Stan Goodenough in my interview the other day said, it's pretty clear now that the United States is an enemy of Israel, and I can't disagree with that at all. The United States government, of course. Here we go. Caroline and David Wormser.
Let me just add to that. I mean, I guess there are two things that I'd like you. I mean, one of them is that the Americans have used this dispute to informally but very clearly rescind U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. I mean, they were saying that the border corrections were only going, we're only going to be dealing with the blue line, and that Hezbollah has a dispute with Syria over the Sheba Farms. No. I mean, the Sheba Farms is Mount Dov. I hate that terminology because it sounds like it's just this little ranch or something. And it's a huge mountain range that is one of the most strategic, heights in the Golan Heights, and it's a crazy talk even to talk about it. But everybody seems to think that you can delude everybody by using this fake terminology of calling it a farm. It's crazy, but that means that the United States doesn't recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and they did this in the UN Security Council deliberations about reinstating the UNIFIL mandate, I think, in South Lebanon. And then the other aspect to it that if you have a chance, if you want to discuss, is that the only thing that may force Israel to think, or is compelling Israel to think strategically about what's happening, is that the residents refuse to go back home. And they're saying, look, we're not going to accept some fake concept that's going to supposedly move the Radwan forces away from our doorsteps. It's not irrelevant. It's not real. And we're not going home so long as these forces exist and they're poised against us, whether it's from a distance of 5 meters or 15 kilometers. We don't really care. No. And so that places tremendous pressure on the government as well to take this seriously.
Yeah, the government's under a lot of pressure to deal with this seriously from exactly the dynamics you mentioned. Look, we're not tolerating, the United States is not tolerating the depopulation of the northern half of Gaza, which is going to be a problem because you're going to have all sorts of people coming back into northern Gaza who are dressed as civilians. They have probably
We're having it now already. It's already started.
Yeah. Exactly. We're buried and hidden in slicks of weapons. They get back in and they shoot Israeli soldiers and they reconstitute very rapidly. I doubt if we don't tolerate the depopulation of the northern half of Gaza that we're going to tolerate the depopulation of Lebanon south of the Litani River. And if civilians are allowed back in south of the Litani River, there are lots of tunnels. There's lots of weapons.
The red is the Litani River. The yellow is the border.
It will last a week, and Hamas and Hezbollah will be back. It's a delusional idea. And if you think UNIFIL will do anything, UNIFIL was responsible for stopping. Israel was up to the Litani River in 2006. It isn't that as part of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, Hezbollah withdrew to the Litani River. Israel was on the Litani River. Israel withdrew. Hezbollah was to be barred from re-entering those territories, and UNIFIL was supposed to enforce that. So again, the word delusion keeps coming up. It's delusional to think that anything like that is possible right now. But I'm glad you raised this issue of the blue line and the American position. Amos Hochstein is going there next week, and according to Arab press reports, this is what he said, which is that he will not deal with the Shaba Farms hard dove issue because it is an issue between Lebanon and Syria. It is part of the Golan Heights. The United States recognized the Golan Heights. Even if
it's part of Israel.
It's a good idea, it's not a good idea, but even if you think it's a good idea to negotiate that border, that is a border now, according to what we have recognized, Israel is the party and Lebanon is the party. And that Israel and Lebanon are the only two ones who should be in the room on this. To now say it is a Lebanese-Syrian issue and not an Israeli-Lebanese issue de-recognizes the Golan Heights. And I'm mystified as to why the Israeli government isn't going through the roof. This is one where they have everybody on America on their side.
The Israeli government is not going through the roof on anything. And, that also speaks to what we were talking about before. The left in Israel, Benny Gantz, very, prominently featured among them, and Yair Lapid, and down to the last, talkbacker on Twitter, they all say that we owe our survival to the United States, that we only are able to fight because of America. And they, on the one hand, they've spent the past decades deepening Israel's dependence on the United States for its military, but on the other hand, then using the United States, which is so anti the Israeli people that it has the nerve to say, you, Prime Minister Netanyahu, have to choose between your coalition partners and Israel's alliance with the United States. And so now they're saying, we cannot stand up to the United States, which is demanding that we stand down in Gaza, that's demanding that we stand down in Lebanon, both in and of themselves, and certainly both of them together place our very existence in question and, in fact, in doubt, because we're dependent on America. And so the question is, can Israel defy America? I mean, what would be the price?
First of all,
so give me the response. Yes.
Israel is currently mentally putting itself in the position not of being dependent on America, but being dependent on a crew of staffers in the White House and in the State Department who are anti-Israeli. They are not America. They are staffers in a current administration there's a whole world of America beyond them. There's Congress, there's the American people, there's political pressures. Israel is paralyzing itself in fear of a group of people it could circumvent.
Well, that's true. And Melanie Phillips at JNS has an excellent article about the similar problem in the UK, about this anti-Israel faction within the government and academia, just like we have here in the United States. So she has an article, it's titled, there's a link in the description, Chilling Winds Towards Israel from Britain and America. Melanie, like Caroline and David Wormser, these are just great thinkers that understand the issue. So, and she says, listen, this is going on. So this is what she says. In both Britain and America, obsessional hostility to Israel seems to be coursing through the structures of organized society. I love the way she writes. In America, 17 anonymous Biden campaign staffers called directly on the president to push for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. In other words, Israel's surrender to Hamas. This followed similar letters from 500 political appointees. You think the election in a few months is important in the United States? Like, to get rid of these people? Now, like, at the end of the last administration, what they did was they took a lot of political appointees and they put them in protected jobs. So my position is what they ought to do is they ought to find out who all those people are. And if you can't get rid of them because of the way the statutes and rules and labor agreements say, put them in a giant Faraday cage. You know what a Faraday cage is? It's like where no internet gets in or out. Stick them in there at a desk. I'm not even giving them a desk. Give them a chair. They have to deposit their cell phones when they go in there each day. They get paid. They get their benefits, and they sit there all day, and they do nothing. And because they can do nothing, they don't do any damage. And this is actually a plan of one of the presidential candidates. And I'm fully on board with it. So 500 political employees and staff members from 40 government agencies, White House interns, and staffers on Capitol Hill were telling Biden, we disagree with what you're doing, Mr. Boss Man. In Britain, a former civil servant, Anna Stanley, wrote a blistering article for Fathom about a counterterrorism course she attended at King's College London before the October 7th pogrom. This course was designed for civil servants and professionals in counterterrorism from various government departments. They heard presentations by lecturers and research fellows, amongst whom were people who had formerly served as a defense minister and a senior official at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and as top officials at the Home Office and the GCHQ intelligence agencies. Some of these lectures, wrote Stanley, relayed typical postmodern identity politics. They taught, with no constraining viewpoint, that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. Labeling an organization terrorist was described as a problem because, quote, it implies a moral judgment, unquote. This is the UK. This happens in America all the time. Nobody really talks about it that much. She recounted, this is a quote, in the introduction, one slide read, condemning terrorism is to endorse the power of the strong over the weak, a dangerous conclusion breeding anti-Israel positions. In this perspective, Israel is seen as a powerful aggressor and the Palestinians militarily disadvantaged in asymmetric warfare. And this is why the judicial reform thing, I disagree with. I have very good friends in Israel who think I'm a lunatic on this. I think judicial reform was required because the Supreme Court has been putting in place rules in Israel, the self-appointed Supreme Court, the way they've organized the rules, talking about proportionality in military engagements. I like what Rush Limbaugh used to say, and I'm a Christian, okay, but he used to say, listen, the purpose of a military is to kill people and break things. And how you determine at the end of a war if you've been successful is if your military has killed more people and broken more things than the other guys. and proportionality has nothing to do with it. Now, that's not very loving, I understand this, but this is, you need to understand the nature of the enemy that people are facing here. One lecturer reported Stanley rubbished a guy named Shawcross by describing him as the type of person who would say all current counterterrorism professionals are woke. He is of that ilk. The lecturer also claimed that the British writer Douglas Murray and American commentator Joe Rogan are both examples of the far right. And somebody said, well, should they be suppressed? And the response was, they have millions of followers. To deplatform them would cause issues, so society needs to find other ways to suppress them. Get this article. This is an important article. So this is a big problem. Remember, we have this memorandum of understanding that was signed back in 2016 in September, just before the election, about what Israel can do and the restrictions that are put on it in terms of getting military aid from the United States. This is an advocacy for a thin constitution. Another article from the Times of the UK saying, you know, there's so much going on that we're in the midst of a defense crisis, and maybe Europe needs to come together to do that. So that's something else. So this week, I'm going to finish with this. I have tons of other stuff. So I'm going to make a couple articles that I want you to look at. I will say that first. This is an article by Jonathan Spire about the long fight to disarm Hamas. It's in the Middle East Forum. It was published originally in the Australian in Australia. Excellent article. Got a lot of good stories. Jonathan's one of the best, if not the best, war correspondents in the Middle East. I hope to interview him sometime in the near future. Very interesting man. So you want to get a copy of that. And then over at the Begin Sadat Center, there's a 3-part series about a new existential war. This is the title page from part 3. Forming a clear post-war national vision means returning to the roots of Zionism. And it's written by a retired major general in the Israeli Defense Force. 3 parts. All the links to that are in our description below. I would highly recommend it, whether you agree with it or not. I thought it was very well thought out, very well written, and something that needed to be said. So we're at this stage where it's 100 days that this has been going on. And so I'm going to play you a clip from the International Court of Justice in The Hague. They had their panel there. South Africa brought a case of genocide against Israel, which is kind of interesting that South Africa would do this, where they are actually killing farmers of a certain race. And the governments there, and I have friends in South Africa, don't put that on us. We're very pro-Israel, and I understand that. It's the government that we're talking about. So here is, I'll skip over the people who presented a case for Hamas. Here is a Jewish lawyer, Israeli Jewish lawyer from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, doing his presentation. Let me jump into that at the beginning. Let's see here. You see the protests out there. Okay, here we go.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you again on behalf of the State of Israel. The State of Israel is singularly aware of why the Genocide Convention, which has been invoked in these proceedings, was adopted. Seared in our collective memory is the systematic murder of 6 million Jews as part of a premeditated and heinous program for their total annihilation. Given the Jewish people's history and its foundational texts, it is not surprising that Israel was among the first states to ratify the Genocide Convention without reservation and to incorporate its provisions in its domestic legislation. For some, the promise of never again for all peoples, is a slogan. For Israel, it is the highest moral obligation. Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jew who witnessed the unspeakable horrors of the Holocaust, is credited with coining the term genocide. He helped the world recognize that the existing legal lexicon was simply inadequate to capture the devastating evil that the Nazi Holocaust unleashed. The applicant has now sought to invoke this term in the context of Israel's conduct in a war it did not start and did not want. A war in which Israel is defending itself against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations whose brutality knows no bounds. The civilian suffering in this war, like in all wars, is tragic. It is heartbreaking. The harsh realities of the current hostilities are made especially agonizing for civilians, given Hamas's reprehensible strategy of seeking to maximize civilian harm to both Israelis and Palestinians, even as Israel seeks to minimize it. But as this court has already made clear, the Genocide Convention was not designed to address the brutal impact of intensive hostilities on the civilian population, even when the use of force raises, quote, very serious issues of international law and involves enormous suffering and continuing loss of life, end quote. The convention was set apart to address a malevolent crime of the most exceptional severity. We live at a time when words are cheap. In an age of social media and identity politics, the temptation to reach for the most outrageous term, to vilify and demonize, has become for many irresistible. But if there is a place where words should still matter, where truth should still matter, it is surely a court of law. The applicant has regrettably put before the court a profoundly distorted factual and legal picture. The entirety of its case hinges on a deliberately curated, decontextualized, and manipulative description of the reality of current hostilities. South Africa purports to come to this court in the lofty position of a guardian of the interest of humanity. But in delegitimizing Israel's 75-year existence in its opening presentation yesterday, that broad commitment to humanity rang hollow. And in its sweeping counterfactual description of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seemed to erase both Jewish history and any Palestinian agency or responsibility. Indeed, the delegitimization of Israel, since its very establishment in 1948 in the applicant's submissions, sounded barely distinguishable from Hamas's own rejectionist rhetoric. It is unsurprising, therefore, that in the applicant's telling, both Hamas's responsibility for the situation in Gaza and the very humanity of its Israeli victims are removed from view. The attempt to weaponize the term genocide against Israel in the present context does more than tell the court a grossly distorted story. And it does more than empty the word of its unique force and special meaning. It subverts the object and purpose of the convention itself, with ramifications for all states seeking to defend themselves against those who demonstrate total disdain for life and for the law. Madam President, members of the court, on Saturday, October 7th, a Jewish religious holiday, thousands of Hamas and other militants breached Israeli sovereign territory by sea, land, and air.
I recommend you go and, I forget the gentleman's name off the top of my head, You can find it out on YouTube and on Twitter. There's a 9-minute clip. His whole talk was about 30 minutes. There was also another person who spoke on behalf of Israel, which was quite good as well. Here is this, like, for example, this is the New York Times this morning. The case against Israel is strong. Really, if what they say is true, everything is genocide. And that's just not true. And it's only genocide because Jews are involved. That's the core of the issue. For example, here's a South African paper today saying Israel failed miserably. Here's a brief response from Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's speaking in Hebrew, but you can read what he has to say. We're fighting terrorists. We are fighting lies. Today, again, we saw an upside-down world in which the state of Israel is accused of genocide at a time when it is fighting genocide. Israel is fighting against murderous terrorists who committed horrific crimes against humanity. They slaughtered, they raped, they burned, they dismembered, they beheaded children, women, the elderly, young men, and young women. A terrorist organization carried out the worst crime against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And now someone comes to defend it in the name of the Holocaust. What brazen gall, the world is upside down. And the IDF, the most moral army in the world, which does everything to avoid harming non-combatants, stands accused by the representatives of these monsters of genocide. South Africa's hypocrisy screams to the high heavens. Where was South Africa when millions of people were being murdered and uprooted from their homes in Syria and Yemen? By whom? By Hamas's partners. The world is upside down. Where were you? We know where we are. We will continue to fight the terrorists. We will continue to refute the lies. We will continue to uphold ourselves, our just right to defend ourselves and to ensure our future until total victory. So again, 100 days. You see a lot of this in the press. Saudis have come out. They're talking about, well, we're going to continue our talks with Iran. The stories in the Israeli press are just heartbreaking. The continued stories of the hostages, the soldiers being killed, that type of thing. And then this is a good article over at the Tablet. October 7th happened before in Hebron. I've talked about that before. Anthony Blink, and you should go read that article at the Tablet. I think the link is in the description below. October 7th happened before in Hebron. And the point is, when it happened in Hebron, it was 1929. What was missing in the slaughter of Jews in 1929? It was the same rhetoric being used now, but there was no Jewish state of Israel in 1929. So there was something bigger going on there. And the Hajj Aman al-Husseini fostered that by telling some lies, mainly that they were going to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is now what we call the operation from Hamas was called Al-Aqsa Flood, because Israel's going to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque. So that's here and there. Blinken was all over the Middle East this week. I'll spare you playing clips of his talk. And then this is in Israel Hayom, a newspaper this morning, looking at approval ratings and that sort of thing. People want a election. Likud and its coalition right now, based on polls, we get about 52 seats, which leaves 68 seats for other people, and maybe the government would change. And there's talk, we're going to do this now. A lot of people want it to happen right now. So that everything's sort of in a state of disruption. I have a lot more that I could say, but I'll save it for later. And listen, pray for the people over there. Look, they're innocent Palestinians that are being caught up in this, and they're being used as shields by a terrorist organization. The question is, how do you deal with it? And you have to take them out, and it's just the way that it is. And everybody wants to rescue the hostages. It's very difficult. There are hundreds of miles of tunnels. They haven't all been uncovered yet. I don't know how this ends, and believe me, I don't know how this ends without a war, a similar war in the north at some point. And the world is going to turn against Israel, against Jerusalem. That's prophesied, and we know that that's part of this end time. So let's pray, and check the description below for links to the articles. Lord, we are so grateful for the blessing that you gave us of prophets who wrote centuries, even millennia ago, indicating what the world would be like, that we would have to navigate as we got closer to the return of the Lord. And Lord, just give us wisdom to understand what's going on, not to be fearful about it, but to warn others and to use it as an opportunity to grow in our faith and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.